Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to have been invited to give you the keynote speech for the Kazim Trust International Conference 2021. It's a real honor and pleasure to be with you on this conference. My name is Debbie Kramer. I am an occupational therapist. I've been working as a therapist, as a lecturer and a researcher for more than 30 years. And of those 30 years, I've worked in Pakistan for 9 years. First as a volunteer in community-based rehabilitation with children with disabilities in the Bastis. Later as a lecturer at AKU IED, where I was teaching on inclusive education, a completely new curriculum part for IED. And then more recently, when I was living in England, I have also conducted a research study with a team of co-researchers with Dow University of Health Sciences and the AMI School. I'll tell you more about that later. From that project, also this picture by one of the children in school who emphasizes that we need to share our similarities and celebrate our differences. And everybody deserves to be included. So today what I'll talk to you about is first the global perspective, what's the international regulations and guidelines on inclusive education, a little bit of history, and what is the current situation in Pakistan around inclusive education, so some policies and implementation. And I'll tell you about the research project where we have worked on developing an approach to inclusive education that can work in Pakistan. And then hopefully by all of that you'll have been challenged to think about your role to promote inclusive education for children with disabilities and special needs in Pakistan. So to go back in history, in 1989 the Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted and signed by nearly all countries in the world, including Pakistan. It is a universally agreed set of non-negotiable standards and obligations. So once you've signed this, you need to commit to this. There's minimum entitlements and freedoms that should be respected by all the governments, and it's founded on respect for the dignity and worth of each individual, regardless of any difference they may have in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, anything, status of socioeconomic strength, and it applies to every human being everywhere. So the rights and the obligations go hand in hand. You have rights to be respected, but you also have the obligation to respect others, and that's from government levels down to personal level. So there is one article in that convention which is specific to disabled children. They should enjoy a full and decent life in conditions which ensure dignity, promote self-reliance and independence, and facilitate their participation in the community. So this is now quite a long time ago, and we are still working on it, so you can imagine how much work it is to implement all this. Disabled children also have the right to special care and assistance, so rehabilitation and schooling and things like that. And it should be, according to this convention, free of charge. This is not the case in many places in the world. So this means access to education, training, healthcare, etc. Anything they may need to live their lives fully, to be employed, to enjoy themselves. Anything the same as other children. This also involves information sharing, not only at a local level, but also at national level and international level, and also between different services like education and health and social services. So this was recognized again also in the Convention on the Rights of Disabled Children later in 2008. And partly also in Education for All, which was much sooner after this in 1990. What's important is that in order to implement inclusive education, in 1994, so not long after the Convention on the Rights of Children, there was the Salamanca Statement. This was based on a conference of special education professionals from all around the world. And they brought out a statement. Again, it has been signed and adopted by nearly all countries in the world, including Pakistan, that every child has a fundamental right to education and should get the opportunities to achieve that. Within that, every child is unique. So they have strengths, they have needs, they have wishes, they have abilities that they can achieve together with other children. In order to achieve the education of all children, they stated that education systems should be redesigned, basically, because at the time, and still in many places, regular education is only aimed at children who have no special needs. So the children who do have those special needs are forgotten about in the way school is designed. So if you go back to the drawing board and say we want education that is good for all, then you can start to design an inclusive approach. So they also explicitly said that rather than putting children in special schools necessarily, although some of them might benefit from that, they must have access to regular education, which should accommodate all children in its community. So if you do that, then what can you achieve? Basically, you combat discriminatory attitudes. So children in the school and teachers in the school and parents of the children in the school will learn that there is no need to separate children with special needs from other children. By that, you then create a community around the school that is more welcoming, and the parents will feed this through into society around them and into their workplace. So you can achieve a more inclusive society for all. Also, by doing this, you will provide an effective education for the vast majority of children. So that is how you achieve education for all, which was already out then. And is much more efficient, because if you try to build two separate systems of education, one for disabled children and one for non-disabled children, it costs double training costs, double building costs, etc. So it's much more efficient to design one system where all children can learn together. Now, in order to, before we go further really, it's important that we understand the difference between inclusion and integration, which is sometimes confused. So if you look at this picture, the circle on the left bottom is exclusion. So the big black circle is school, and the colored dots are children. So the green dots are children who are not deemed to have any special needs, and the other colors are children who do have differences. So in this case, exclusion means that children with disabilities or known disabilities are not admitted into school at all. Now, this is the case for a large proportion of disabled children in Pakistan, as I'll show you later. And this obviously is not at all what we want. Then what you see is segregation. So you separate out children with and without disabilities. In this case, you have the main school where the green dots, the children without special needs, study, and a different separate school, a segregated setting where disabled children study. This is not really what we want for the majority of children. Sometimes it can be okay, but most of the time this is not what we want. We would like inclusion. Then integration is where schools are admitting children with special needs, mainstream schools, but they treat them separately in some way. So it could be that they have a separate classroom and they don't know and play with the other children in the school. Or sometimes they are in the same room, but they might have a completely different curriculum, activities. Maybe they even have a separate teacher. So they, again, are not included in the general day-to-day running of the school. They're not socially included, and they don't have the opportunity to learn together and play together. So again, this might be a situation that could be okay for a school that is exploring how they could be more inclusive, and this is how they start out, but this is not where it should stop. The picture at the top is inclusion. That is what we were working towards, so that all children within a community are studying in the same school, and they have the same teacher, the same curriculum, the same teaching and learning activities. There may be some adaptations, obviously for some children, but in the basis they are following the same education, they are in the same social environment, the same activities of the school. So that is what we're working towards. Now, in Pakistan, the National Education Policy of 2017, which is still valid until 2025, I think it is, actually commits to expanding access to education for children with special needs. They are working towards inclusion within the policy and an equitable quality of education for all children. They want to do this in child-friendly schools. So this is schools where children are safe and they can thrive both socially and educationally, and they should be inclusive. At the same time, they also want to expand special education in the light of these international commitments that I've just told you about, and to provide the necessary facilities and services and the infrastructure for inclusive education. So they recognize that there is a lot that is needed for this at all levels of education, so pre-nursery, nursery, primary, secondary, and university and college education. And to make sure that every child is in school, so to universalize, so that all boys and girls are in school, and so that it might need more special education institutions as well as more inclusive schools. This is very good news that this is so strongly in the policies, national policies, but there is a way to go before we achieve it. At the moment, the primary out-of-school rate, so there's children of primary age who are not in school, is 18% for boys, so that's nearly 1 in 5 boys are not in school, and 29 for girls, so that's nearer 1 in 3 girls that are not in school in Pakistan. So that's quite a dramatic rate. The primary school completion rate at any age, so they might be older than that age, is 64% for boys and 55% for girls. So this, again, not all children who start primary will complete it. Upper secondary is obviously even lower, and there are only 43% of boys reach the end of secondary school and 38% of girls. Now the youth literacy rate, so these are children that are mainly out of school already, or young people, and so from 15 to 24 years, the literacy rate is actually higher than that, so 80% for boys and 66% for girls. So this means that actually we are at risk of reducing the literacy rate over the next few years if this doesn't improve. Considering the fact that 41% of the population is under 18 years old, this is quite a serious worry. So this is for any child, whether or not they have special needs. So this is an illustration of how difficult it is to get children into school, even if they do not have special needs, and then if they do, it makes it even harder. It's difficult to know how many children with disabilities and other significant special needs are actually in school because there's not an accurate number of these children. There have been census data, but it is unclear how the census data was collected, like how reliable it is. So that is a problem. And there's no accurate data really on the number of special schools, because some of them obviously are government schools, we know about them, some are private schools, and some are small project schools that are not even counted. What we do know is that it's quite rare to see children with obvious disabilities in mainstream schools, although some luckily have started admitting them. And when you talk about children who have more hidden problems like VCD or ADHD or autism spectrum disorders that are not as pronounced, then we don't know, because they're quite hidden, literally, in the schools, and they might be struggling to participate for whatever reason, and therefore they may be left seated in the back row in some of the schools, or in some of other schools they might be asked to leave because they're not achieving well. So it's likely to be very low, the enrollment rate totally. For children with clear significant disabilities, the estimated percentage is only 5 to 10%, as even the government has recognized. And teacher training is quite rare. Even general education, teacher education is now starting to become more common and more required. But for a long time it was not. So a lot of teachers have not been trained to work with children with special needs at all. So that's a problem. That's stopping it from improving in terms of admission rate. Of course, where schools are starting to include children, understandably they start with children that they think might be easier to include, and then they hope that it will build up later to all. But whether they're really included or merely integrated or even segregated in that system, that is difficult to know. There's not enough broad research on that. So back to the policy. The government acknowledges those challenges. So even at policy level, there is a lack of awareness and lack of priority for this. There's a lack of funds and there's a lack of collaboration. So it's there on paper, but in order to build up that strong implementation of policy, that will still take time, and it will take lobbying by people like you and me. At the school level, there's a shortage and a low quality of special schools, but also of inclusive schools. There's a lack of expertise and materials, and also there is quite a lot of resistance from teachers sometimes, or owners of schools or administrators, to include children with special needs. Again, not all schools obviously, but this is still quite common. And at community level, there is stigma. Parents lack the understanding for the need of education of that disabled child, saying, well, they won't work, so why invest? Or sometimes there will be worries by the parents of the children without special needs, because they worry that their child might be affected by the presence of a disabled child in class. So the goal is to ensure equitable access for all, and to provide the training and the personnel to support that. And the target is to increase the participation rate of disabled children from the 5% that I just mentioned to 100% by 2025. Now, I don't think we have really increased much since 2017, so there's a lot of work to be done. And also that another target is to create an inclusive learning environment in 50% of schools, colleges and universities, to facilitate not just the enrollment getting there, but then the quality of education that the children get. These policies have been implemented down on provincial levels as well. So, for example, in Sindh, there is the right of children to Free Compulsory Education Act, and that specifically states that children with special needs will be given admission, and that training will be provided for their teachers to be able to teach them well. Because this is difficult to read and implement, the Right to Education Pakistan organization has produced an implementation guide, which you can see in the picture here. Do look that up if you are working in a school, because it will help you to understand how you might implement what the government is committing to do. and use this also to lobby the government to say, this is what you are committing to do. I'm willing to implement this with you. Come on my side. So the reality is, of course, that despite these policies, it's not happening yet. Children with obvious disabilities are not really in school much more than 5 years ago, and many mainstream schools are still reluctant because they fear they cannot cope with teaching these children. For children with hidden disabilities, there are not enough inclusive mainstream schools yet where their needs will be recognized and supported. And of course, there's no clear enforcement anywhere. You can still be told to leave a school and then left to your own devices to find another school in Pakistan. And teacher training for supporting children with special needs is still very much lacking. There are lots of initiatives, but the scale is so large it's difficult to catch up. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the project that we conducted. I was the project coordinator for this. So it was a collaborative action research project between occupational therapy departments of Brunel University in London, where I was working at the time, and at Dow University of Health Sciences, where there is an occupational therapy school, and then the AMI school, an inclusive primary school in Karachi, was our non-university partner in this project. It was funded by the British Council and by the Higher Education Commission of Pakistan, and it ran from 2015 to 18. We used action research, participatory action research, and in this process you don't just collect information, but you take action as well. So you start with an exploratory phase to identify the key issues in the school and to figure out what your goal is going to be. And then you have a spiral of cycles, lots of different ones running at the same time, one after the other, where you first make a plan, you act on it, you then have a phase where you observe and figure out what was the impact of that action that we took, reflect on it, and then go back to the plan to adjust it until you have come to a good solution for your problem, or a good improvement of services, or whatever it is you were planning to do. This is a very good way of working together and to make sure that these changes will continue to be practiced, because the people involved in the actual situation are your co-researchers in the process. It's dynamic and messy, but it is very real, and it helps people practice what they are finding out straight away. You work really as a team of co-researchers. So in our case, we had teachers and occupational therapists. We had the school leadership, we had parents, children, and the learning through the process is just as important really as the individual solutions that we found. And what did we learn? Collaboration, problem solving, and reflection. And reflection is a key skill for any good teacher, so that you reflect on what you see the effect of your teaching or actions on the children is, and therefore improving your teaching style and quality. So why occupational therapy? Well, occupational therapy promotes the health and well-being of people through occupation. That means meaningful daily activities. And school is an extremely meaningful daily activity of all children. It enables people to fully participate in all the activities of daily life. And it works with both individuals, children or adults, and communities to support them to do what they want to do, need to do, or expected to do. So in some cases that could be improving skills in that person or that community, but it can also be by modifying the activities or the environment. The World Federation of Occupational Therapists strongly supports this new way of being engaged in schools by occupational therapists. It supports the basis on which it's done. That's the international policies on inclusive education. And it emphasizes the responsibility and the skills of OTs to support this. It points out the need to work on 3 levels of intervention, which I will explain to you on the next slide. And it promotes a collaborative approach. So this very much fit with the research plan that we had. And the focus should always be on the full participation of all children. So these 3 tiers or levels of intervention, if you look at tier 1 at the bottom, is called universal design or universal support for all students. So the occupational therapists and teachers work together to see what could happen in the school to make learning, socializing, and general physical development, for example, of all children more effective. This includes the atmosphere and the culture in the school. Then the second tier are children who are having some difficulties with learning in some classes, and there you might work with some smaller groups in a targeted approach. And these children would then work in those groups and collaborate and have maybe a slightly different way of explaining activities, or maybe a more hands-on way of learning, or a different way of testing their knowledge. There could be all sorts of targeted adjustments. And then once you've done all that, there will be a very small percentage of children that would still need an individual approach, maybe some therapy for strengthening their pencil grasp, for example, or social skills, or other ways, but that would be a very small percentage of children once they have benefited from the universal and targeted approaches. So what we did a situational analysis of the whole school to look at what was already done that facilitates inclusion, but also what is still blocking it, and also looking at the physical and social environment in the classroom, the school, and the playground. After that, through the first 2 years, there was classroom observation where the occupational therapy and the teacher would work together in the school, and they would either focus on a group or the whole class as an issue, or individual children. And they would use, in both situations, the person, environment, and occupation approach, which I will explain in a second, to see where the barriers were. And then after that, they would use that action research process that I was just telling you about to develop either materials or strategies of teaching, inclusive lesson plans, changes to the environment, or the whole culture of the school. And there was a drawing in of others that could support children, so either the parents or sometimes therapists from outside, or a psychologist, or whoever could have a role in supporting the child. The PEO, which I was talking to you about, the person, is that child with their strengths, with their needs, physical, cognitive, or emotional needs and challenges, but also just their personality, their preferences, who they are, etc. The occupation, that's the activity itself. Is it suitable? What are the challenges? What can be changed? And then often we would change it in a way that it would also benefit the rest of the class. And the environment, so where is it taking place? What's happening in the classroom? Can the child see properly? How's the lighting? How is the sound? Is there lots of distraction? Are there rules and regulations that are hard for the child or any of the children to follow in the school? And then if those 3 are coming together well, that is when you get full participation. Just for the last couple of minutes, some examples. So this is an example at the AMI school where the class 5 teacher is teaching geography, and there were a few children in class who had difficulty with comprehension of new concepts. So in this case, there was a lesson on landforms, and the children had great difficulty figuring out what it all meant and how to remember these different names. So they developed together hands-on materials that the children could manipulate and handle, and then they were taking turns, and they were able to collaborate to join these pictures with name cards. And by doing it this way, the children who had comprehension and memorization problems found it much more easy, but they also found that the rest of the children in the class equally benefited from this, and therefore the teachers were encouraged to continue to have a more activity-based style of teaching, even for the children in the higher classes. And this worked very well. And of course, it also then helped the behavior of children in the class, because they felt they were able to participate much better. Another example from nursery, where it was not just particular children. This was a class that had a lot of difficulty with the structure and their behavior. And so they figured out that if they had extra activities available for children who had completed their tasks, then the children would focus better on their learning tasks, and then they didn't get bored. They were able to then spend some time on activities that helped them to use their hands, their eyes, their creativity, and the behavior problems were much improved by putting that in the structure of the day. Now, we've put together all these learning experience through this research into a resource guide, which has 4 parts. The one is introduction of key concepts, a bit like I have told you today. Inclusive education, action research, occupational therapy, what does it all mean? And then practical strategies for inclusion, which have been presented by showing the action research project process, so that also the reader can figure out how they might apply that same process in different kind of situations as well. So at both school and classroom level and individual level, and responding to very specific challenges. There's lots of examples. Also the importance of spreading the word within the school community and parents, and maybe with other schools that you have contact with, and links and resources to national and international resources online. And you can download this from our website, otiepakistan.pk. So what can you do? You can welcome children into your school, regardless of whether they have special needs or not, if you have the power to do so. If you don't have the power to do so, you could lobby your own school leadership. You could lobby the education department at provincial level or even national level, because once you know the children's rights from their own policies, you can really lobby them to say, we are ready to include more children, but we need finance, we need personnel, we need training, etc. So demand that. It's not easy, but I think if we all start to demand it, something will start to shift. Also, if you're in a school, get support from occupational therapists particularly. They're very practical profession. They look at the whole child, they look at their environment, as I said, and how it fits in. But also other therapists, obviously physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, but also psychologists, for example, are very useful professionals to work with in the school, but challenge them not to only look at individual children, but also to help you problem solve issues in the school as a whole. Also very important, work much more with your parents, all the parents in your school. Collaborate with them. Don't keep them out of the school, but invite them in. A lot of parents will also be willing to volunteer, for example, to do reading sessions or arts sessions where children can develop their motor skills, for example, or sports days, or invite them in because they know their children best and they can really contribute to improving your school. Be flexible, focus on participation and development, Don't panic if not all children pass all their exams. It is important, but it is not as important as the child developing a good sense of self-worth and confidence in their abilities. And of course, download a resource guide and use it at school or even at home to support your children with special needs. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you a great conference today and tomorrow.